Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Kylie if this is your first time here, and welcome to the land of adult braces and extremely outgrown roots. As you saw by the title today, yes, oh, yeah. Ow! Ow! It has hit my ankle! Yes, I will be reviewing one of my favorite movies, Scream. So Scream was written by Kevin Williamson, directed by Wes Craven. It came out in 1996 and received a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes. The sleepy little town of Woodsboro just woke up screaming. There's a killer in their midst who's seen a few too many scary movies. Suddenly, nobody is safe, as the psychopath stalks victims, taunts them with trivia questions, then rips them to bloody shreds. It could be anybody. So if you're new here, I do a bunch of research about the movie that I'm talking about. I give you guys a bunch of fun facts, then I get into a spoiler-free review if you haven't seen the movie yet, and then I get into my spoiler-filled breakdown. And sometimes during the breakdown I'll talk about my favorite scenes, different plot points, etc. This is also one of many horror series that I've done on my channel. I also did Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Child's Play, and on Wednesday I'm starting my Harry Potter series. So I hope you guys stick around. I hope you check out my other content. You can also check out my Patreon, get some extra content on there, get some early access content. Also all my social media and vlog channel will be linked down below. And if you're new, I do hope that you like and subscribe, but without further ado, let's get into the fun facts. There is a party scene near the end of this film that runs for 42 minutes. It was shot over the course of 21 days, and they would shoot from the time that the sun set to the time that it rose. After the movie wrapped, the crew made shirts that said, "I survived scene 118." And the cast and crew jokingly called it the longest night in horror history. At the beginning of the movie, when Casey's parents come home and the parents realize something is wrong, the father tells the mother to head over to the Mackenzies, which is the same thing that Laurie told Tommy and Lindsay to do in Halloween from 1978, of which this movie Scream actually contains many references. When Henry Winkler opens the closet, his black leather Fonzie jacket from Happy Days can be seen hanging in it. The use of caller ID increased more than threefold after the release of this film. Apparently Drew Barrymore and Neve Campbell did not meet the voice actor Roger Jackson before filming their scenes with him. Whenever they're talking on the phone to the killer, they are actually talking to him on the phone. In fact, none of the cast met him because Wes Craven thought that it would provide a more authentic reaction when they actually called him for the scenes. Now for some casting stories, because I find all of this really interesting. Freddie Prinze Jr. auditioned for the role of Stu. I think that's just really funny because Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard were both just kings of the late 90s, early 2000s. They were both in Scooby-Doo, so I thought that was funny. Matthew Lillard was cast as Stu because he went with his then girlfriend to one of her auditions that took place in the same building, but it was like elsewhere. The casting director, Lisa Beach, saw Lillard in the hallway and she was like, "Hey, do you want to audition for Scream?" And apparently they said he got into the role with incredible ferocity. Courtney Cox actually approached the production for the role of Gale Weathers. She was interested in playing more of a villainous character to offset her nice appearance from Friends. Her Friends image was the initial reason why they didn't actually want to cast Courtney Cox, but she continued to lobby with the studio because she really felt that she could play the character, and ultimately she got the role. Apparently Joaquin Phoenix turned down the role of Billy Loomis. That, I don't even, like, could you imagine? But as we know, Skeet Ulrich was ultimately cast as Billy Loomis, and part of the reason why he was cast is because of his slight resemblance to Johnny Depp. I think that was definitely so Wes Craven could bring a Nightmare on Elm Street type feel to the movie, because also in Scream, Billy Loomis comes through the window much like Johnny Depp does in Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven asked Neve Campbell specifically to audition for this movie because he saw her in the 1994 movie Party of Five. He thought that she would be able to embody a character that was innocent but could still definitely handle herself, and I think that was a great choice. We love Neve Campbell. The original title of this movie was actually Scary Movie, which was then used in a parody movie later on. The term Scary Movie is also mentioned 5 times throughout this movie. The special effects artist in this movie used about 50 gallons of blood. And finally, for my last fun fact, Kevin Williamson actually listened to the soundtrack of Halloween to get inspiration for this script, and excerpts from that score appear in this film as well. Did I say soundtrack to Halloween? I think I meant to say score. Okay, so I wanted to include a lot of facts into my conversation because I just feel like in terms of reviewing, I don't know how much more I have to add to the Scream conversation. I think I saw this movie for the first time about 3 or 4 years ago, or I might have been in high school. And I just watched it for the second time with my boyfriend. If you're new, my boyfriend doesn't like horror, but he's kind of coming around because he actually liked the Scream movies that I've shown him so far. He tends to like slashers and he also really likes dark comedies, so he loved Freaky. Anyways, off topic. Sorry, you know I go on tangents sometimes. I think this movie is brilliant. I think it's the ultimate blend of teen horror, slasher, comedy, drama, drama, all of it. So I'm not gonna go super into detail about all the various aspects of this movie. I think it's just so well done in its entirety that I don't need to go into detail. The first thing that I want to touch on though during this conversation is the casting, because I just like told you guys a bunch of info about it. I don't think it could have been any better. Like, the casting for this movie, just mwah. This cast really feels like home to me, and I can't really think of another horror movie that has this same effect to it, because while I love Halloween, a lot of the characters in that movie are very empty, like they don't really contribute very much, whereas I feel like with Scream, all the characters are so dynamic, they're so well thought out, and they feel very real. Well, maybe, I don't know, Jordan Peele casts his movies really quite well. Let me know what movies you think were cast perfectly down below, please. I just have to say, because I love him so much, that Matthew Lillard is perfect in this movie. He is my favorite character in this movie. He's so weird. Like, he was truly one of the kings of the early 2000s. I fell in love with him as this man, as Mr. Shaggy Rogers. God, those movies were so formative. And they were also cast so perfectly. There's another one on the list. So Matthew Lillard is hands down my favorite, but also Neve Campbell is a close second. And there's another character that's kind of unexpectedly one of my favorites, but we'll get there. Sydney is just the perfect example of a highly capable leading woman. In a lot of slashers, the leading woman, like the final girl, is just extremely passive and so much happens to her. She's usually not very proactive and is not much of a fighter. It's just kind of like by chance that she survives. Sydney is a bad bitch. I also love how much background info there was with her character, because it allowed for a lot of character development, and also with her backstory, everything was so like nicely tied together in the end as well. Her mother was murdered a year prior to the events of this movie, and that's such a like heavy form of exposition to give a character, but it works so well. And you wouldn't ever really expect that in a slasher. Like, you don't expect these super heavy themes to come in, but they were handled really well. I appreciated it. So like I said, everything comes so full circle, and I felt so much resolution with each and every character. I also want to point out that Courtney Cox is great in this movie. It's definitely a contrast to Monica, and thank God, because I'm not really a fan of Monica. Gail is just really well written, and I love her character arc as well. Because at first you're like, who is this reporter and why do we care? But then they totally tie it up. Also, Drew Barrymore, yeah. Spoiler section, we will talk. One major factor of this movie that I have to talk about before getting into the spoiler section as well is the fashion, baby. Let's look at some of my favorite outfits, okay? For some reason, this basic sweater jeans fit when Sydney is being chased around the house, I don't know, I love it. I just love that 90s style of like the solid colors. I love how white the shoes are, they're so clean. I love how her sweater doesn't fit because it's too big, give me all of it. And obviously Tatum, oh my god, she is hands down the most well-dressed character in this movie. None of her outfits were amiss. Her in the lunch scene, I loved her. I love how realistic it feels. I love the way that she's like leaning against Matthew Lillard, and they just have like such a good dynamic. And her in the garage scene too, I mean, wow. And Gale Weathers, she has some outfits that I can appreciate, but the only thing that's coming to mind right now is that like lime green suit. But moving on, a plot device that I want to vaguely dip into is the phone calls. Back in the 90s is when wireless phones were really like first starting to be popularized, so I would imagine that the reason why this movie was received so well is because it was also one of the first to utilize phone calls as a horror element. And it is terrifying. Like, I wasn't alive back then, but it is scary to think about transitioning into a world where if someone is calling you on the phone, they could be right outside your window. And they didn't even necessarily rely on that as a horror element. It was really only used a couple of times, but it was just enough, and it was so well done that it became kind of the defining horror element of this movie. And of course, before I get on to my spoiler-filled section, I just want to talk about the meta-commentary of this movie. It's so self-aware, and the commentary that this movie makes just hits the nail right on the head. To the point where the characters have dialogue about what's literally happening to them in the current moment. But it's not overdone, and somehow the movie still remains unpredictable. It manages to make meta-commentary while still breaking free of a lot of tropes. It does use some tropes, but it's pretty minimal, and they do tend to surprise you more often than not. It's a wonderful movie, a wonderful franchise. I can't wait to rewatch all the rest of them now, and I'm excited to get more into this movie, so let's actually talk about some fun facts that contain spoilers, and then I'll get into my spoiler-filled breakdown. Drew Barrymore was originally cast as Sidney Prescott, but Drew insisted that if she played Casey, then it would make the audience think that anything could happen. When the killer smashes his head through a window and Casey hits him in the head with a phone, that is actually director Wes Craven under that mask, and he really got hit in the head. After filming Tatum's death scene in the garage, Rose McGowan was actually all covered in bruises. She had them all on her torso and her inner arm from dangling from the pet door for several hours. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is commitment. According to Skeet Ulrich, he said at a convention that it was Billy that killed her in the garage. There is a subtle joke when Randy is yelling at the television because Halloween is playing, and so he's telling Jamie Curtis to turn around. He's like, "Turn around, Jamie." This is a joke not only because the killer is behind him, but also because the actor's name is Jamie. So therefore he was kind of telling himself to turn around at the same time. Like I said, like the meta commentary is like interjected, and so like characters have dialogue of the stuff that's actually happening to them. Anyways, for my last fun fact, Matthew Lillard actually ad-libbed the line where he said, "My parents are gonna be so mad at me," and Wes Craven thought that it was so funny that he kept it in the movie. So getting into it, as I said, Matthew Lillard is brilliant in this movie, and that is actually my favorite line of the entire movie. But I love almost everything that comes out of his mouth in this movie as well. So Drew Barrymore dying. The first time that I saw this movie, I was horrified. I think I saw this movie about 20 years after it came out. I never got the spoiler. I think I was in high school when I saw it. So I didn't know that she died. She is literally on the poster for the movie. She looks like a leading character. And she's Drew Barrymore, you know? So like when she died, I was astounded. I was like, what does this movie have in store for me? And I was a little bit upset because she was one of the only actors in the movie that I actually knew. So I was like, man, we're not following her. But Neve Campbell was our girl. I would not change a thing. Like I said, I love the journey that Sydney goes on through this movie with her character development and the fact that her mom dies and her ultimately kind of coming into her power by the end of this movie. And like I said, these themes are treated really well despite it being more of a comedy. There's not too much to say there. I think she's just an amazing character and she truly is the backbone of this franchise. So is Gale Weathers though. The women are the backbone. So speaking of, like I mentioned, I love Gale's character arc as well. You hate her in the beginning of the movie, but then by the end you realize that she's right about Cotton, which okay, she didn't actually care about saving his life, she just wanted to capitalize off of it. But nonetheless, she was right. And then by the end of the movie, she is the bad bitch that saves the day. There was actually a lot of feminine empowerment in this movie, including the fact that our final girl got laid. She got laid and lived. It's amazing, honestly, that that's an accomplishment in cinema. Like, let women have sex. And lastly, let's discuss the twist. Somehow the first time I saw the movie, I didn't see it coming. I was actually, frankly, quite flabbergasted. And then upon rewatch, I was like, damn, how stupid was I? Because I remember the first time that I saw it, especially when Billy got arrested and whatnot, I was like, dang, he is sus, but I don't know, is it the boyfriend? That seems too obvious. So then I ultimately convinced myself that it wouldn't be Billy, and lo and behold, of course it was. Especially because there's moments when Randy is interacting with him or with Stu, and he's like, you're telling me he's not the killer? And upon a rewatch, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, duh, no kidding. And I guess maybe that's why I thought it wasn't him, because I was like, okay, it's too obvious. But sometimes if something isn't broken, you don't fix it, and it really worked. Stu actually was pretty surprising to me. I also love the contrast between him and Billy, where Billy is carrying out a revenge plot, and then Stu is just like, peer pressure. Also with the ending, I love that we kind of feel a sense of relief once we see that Sydney's dad is there, because it's like, oh goodness, thank god, someone else to help her. But nope. That man was locked in a closet for the remainder of the climax, and the women saved the day. Sydney don't need no man, okay? She needs Gale Weathers. And lastly, I think the last thing I want to talk about is that this movie has really strong callbacks. And like I said, I mean, everything comes so full circle. My favorite callback by far, I think, would have to be the 30-second delay of the van's video feed. That came into play so well when the poor camera guy died, because by the time you realize what's going to happen, it's already happening. I thought that was so well done. And then of course, when Billy is revealed to be the killer, it's a callback to every time that Randy said that Billy was the killer. Overall, in my opinion, I think that this movie is Wes Craven's best work. I know that's debatable for some people because of Nightmare on Elm Street. This is my favorite Wes Craven movie, and one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And despite the fact that this movie kind of relies on shock value by breaking tropes, it's still extremely rewatchable because of how goddamn charming all these characters are. And of course, all the iconic dialogue. I mean, in my opinion, I think this movie is a 10 out of 10. So that does it for my review of Scream. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you subscribe and join me next week when I talk about Scream 2. As I mentioned, I also have my Harry Potter series going on, and then I have other miscellaneous videos that come out on Friday. And also join my Patreon for even more content. On the topic of Patreon, I do want to thank Donna Kayleen for joining, as well as KWally1987. I appreciate you guys joining so much, and I'm so happy to have you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!